William, first of all, how justified does this draft resolution suspending the Russian delegation's rights look to you?
It's a silly act by silly people, I think, because every time since around March of last year that the West wants an excuse to tighten sanctions on Russia, they just make it up out of the whole cloth, largely. So this is just silly. There's no other word for it. It's silly people doing silly things.
Has there been any sort of justification as why why they would be able to suspend some of Russia's rights?
Well, I haven't seen any, and certainly the accusations out of Kiev that from Poroshenko and others that Putin's forces were behind the latest military activity in the eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas and Donetsk and so forth with the airport. There's absolutely no evidence for that. In fact, the evidence that I've seen points to just the opposite. You have hired mercenary killers from companies like Blackwater. They're actually caught on tape with a heavy English-speaking accent saying, "Get out of my face, buddy," that kind of thing. And that's not a native Ukrainian speaking to his fellow Ukrainian in English. So I think we have the West, NATO, caught with their hand in a very bloody cookie jar in East Ukraine, and you have reports of desertions, mass desertions of the Ukrainian army, because Ukrainians don't want to fight and kill their neighbors, their fellow countrymen, and that's what they're being asked to do, essentially by Washington, and the spineless bureaucrats of the European Union are going along with that for one reason or another.
You know, one of the things that always made me curious about the situation is that supposedly, on one hand, the Western governments have these super powerful spy satellites that can, read the time off your watch, and yet on the other hand, we read that there's Russian soldiers in Ukraine, there are Russian divisions inside of Ukraine. Well, where's the proof? Where are these spy satellites that can just show us very clearly, hey, look, they came from here, they went there, and this is exactly how many they have and exactly where they are now. Why haven't they shown any of this?
Well, it might just well be because that hasn't been what has been going on. I have evidence from Ukrainian friends and people on the scene and so forth that these are people fighting for their homes, they're fighting for their families. They are a formidable force when your opponent out of Kiev is a mercenary army of untrained raw recruits or neo-Nazis like the Azov Brigade that's been recruited to simply wreak havoc in East Ukraine, atrocities, and they're pathological enough to want to do that with joy. So, they're just pointed in East Ukraine and let loose like a bunch of
jackals.
Jackals. But I think it's important to keep the larger point in mind, and that is it's a war going on between a faction in the U.S. establishment called neoconservatives, Victoria Nuland, Susan Rice, and others, the Committee for New American Security in Washington, and Carter Ashton, the new defense secretary. And these are war hawks. They're hired thugs, hired guns, propaganda guns of the military-industrial complex that was facing obliteration in terms of budget cuts only 2 years ago. That's not the only reason, but the powerful families, the Rockefellers, the Soroses, and so forth, the billionaire families that believe that they run this world, this so-called globalized New World Order, they're losing power everywhere. They're losing it in Syria, they're losing it in Iraq, they're losing it across the Middle East, in Egypt, and now they're losing it in Eurasia because China and Russia are making absolutely brilliant moves so far to make themselves independent of the dollar system, and that's the only thing that's going to save the world from absolute hell over the next 2 to 5 years, in my view.
Well, I'd love to discuss the de-dollarization theme that many people are talking about, but we'll have to do that in a different segment. Now, earlier, Western leaders threatened new sanctions, or threatened Russia with new sanctions after at least 30 people were killed in an attack in Mariupol, and that was this last weekend. In your opinion, why does the West seem to choose punishing Russia just over focusing on the actual investigation and bringing those responsible to justice. I mean, shouldn't the 30 some dead people, shouldn't their families have some kind of closure on this and know exactly who, pulled the trigger, so to speak?
Of course they should in a just world. But anything is being used to try to demonize Russia, to try to demonize Putin and create an excuse to escalate the sanctions, because the faction in the West wants a World War III. They want to destroy Russia as a functioning nation state. They want to destroy China as the next on the line, and create a global, in my view, a globalized totalitarianism or fascism, whatever name you want to give it, police state.
Well, this is okay. Well, this is definitely one of the ideas there, that World War III could start inside of eastern Ukraine, but there's a lot of.
It already has started, Jay. In a real sense, we're in it. We're just in the early phases of it, and no one's calling it by that name. They talk about a new Cold War. We're in a hot war. What do you think Eastern Ukraine is all about? That's a hot war. It's a front on a global war against genuine independence from a military superpower that's out of control.
Well, then let me ask you this. Would you say that Kiev is not committed at all to the peace process then?
I don't see any indication that they ever have been. They're committed to do whatever's necessary to try to get military backup from NATO and from the U.S. And so far, President Obama has just given them crumbs. We're going to train the new Ukrainian military recruits, says the U.S. commander in Europe, but we'll start it in the spring, 3 months from now, 4 months from now. What kind of half-hearted gesture is that?
Well, it's definitely. I believe those trainings themselves had already been pre-planned for some time, right? Or was this? So it's not exactly as if the trainings were in response necessarily to the events that happened last weekend or the events that took place.
No. But I'm just saying, if you're treating this as an emergency situation as NATO, then you would be in there right now, instead of sending Blackwater hired killers in there to try to do ex-Green Beret and Special Forces to try to do the killing for you. They obviously aren't doing such a good job either.
Sure. Well, it's definitely a difficult situation. I've spoken to many people on this topic, and it's something that it's really impossible to be able to wrap your head around the way that these people are living there. It seems as if people are living in constant fear, constant terror. On one hand, they have airplanes that are dropping bombs. On the other hand, the soldiers that are on the ground are just killing indiscriminately. And it seems as if it's a very dark period in time in eastern Ukraine now, and it seems as if these people are really left all on their own, since it is a civil war. But with the idea that it's a civil war, what should be done to finally put an end to the conflict there in eastern Ukraine? Could it happen anytime soon?
Well, I think the Poroshenko government, or whatever government of gangsters and crooks is sitting in Kiev, if they were serious about a resolution of this, they'd stop the military side and open diplomatic talks and find a modus vivendi, a federalized or decentralized Ukrainian system where you let local regions decide their own language or co-language, whether it's Ukrainian and Russian or whatever, and have more genuine democracy and not this top-down Washington-dictated. Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador in Kiev, is the one calling all the shots by all reports that I've seen. So he's dictating to Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk exactly what the next moves are going to be.
Well, not only that, it was within the last few months, I believe about 2 months ago, that several of the key members of the new people in Ukraine were sworn into office, and actually, as it turned out to be, they were foreigners. Three
of them, yes. 3 government ministers are foreign nationals, 2 of them dealing with the most sensitive issues of finance, and one of them is a U.S. citizen, or was until 2 months ago.
That actually had worked Georgia, in the embassy.
Yeah, one of them comes out of Georgia, and his wife has been identified as a CIA operative. So, this is a nice bunch of thugs that Washington has brought in and pushed down the throats of the Ukrainian people.
I'd just like to add that one of the key people in finance from America had worked in the U.S. Embassy in the early 90s as well. So it's a very interesting development, which didn't get a lot of coverage in the West, but it definitely sets the stage inside of Ukraine slanted towards one way, and definitely that way it really seems to be is not towards peace, as there's nothing to be gained by achieving peace. I'd like to say thank you for joining us in the show. I'd love to have you back to discuss some of the issues that we were unable to talk with in this segment. Speaking to us live on the phone was William Engdahl, an American geopolitical analyst and an author.